Herzlich willkommen zum Auftakt von Einfach mal die Welt verändern.
Just Change the World. I would like to welcome the audience here at the event studio of Radio Bremen, and I would like to welcome the audience at the Bremen representation in Berlin, because there are also people over there. We are streaming live on YouTube. If you would like to listen to English, please just switch over to the channel in English. Shouldn't be a problem. 50 years of University of Bremen. This is an occasion to celebrate, and this series of events has been organized by the University of Bremen together with the Alumni Association of Bremen. And 50 years of University of Bremen, there's a lot of occasion to look back. But today we would like to look into the future, into the endless far ranges and reaching for the stars. This is the topic today, and we would like to find out what this is all about. That is City of Space and Bremen. What do Bremen aerospace companies do? What do they plan? What are their visions, and what are projects which are within reach? And how do they collaborate with the University of Bremen? Where do things get together? What are the projects? What about networking? So these are the topics that we're interested in today. And my guests today are Hans Königsmann, the space engineer who in the mid-90s had been researching at the ZARM, the Center of Applied Space Technology and Microgravity. He then went to the United States, and for 18 years he'd been working with Elon Musk. That is at SpaceX company. He was the vice director. He withdrew, and we're not going to talk about retirement here, but he's still advising and consulting. And I would like to say good morning to Los Angeles, Hans Königsmann.
Well, good evening to Bremen. It's good to hear you. It's good to participate.
And I can see that there's also a slight remark with regard to your professional activity. There's a picture at the background, and it says Mars. Is this just art? Or is that something that means more and something that you would like to explain to us? And there's also rocket.
Well, that's right. That's the Falcon 9 on this side, and Mars is on the other side. This is poster to entice people to buy their tickets to Mars.
Oh, okay, this could happen during the evening, who knows. Then I would like to welcome Claudia Klessler. She is an aerospace engineer, and she's been working in many different functions in the aerospace industry. And now she's got one major objective, and that is to get the first German woman into space. Why is there a problem? Why is Germany or ESA not yet ready? Because other countries are far ahead of us. And today, when I just was checking something, I got an impression because I entered Claudia Kessler and aerospace engineer, and then somebody says Claudia Kessler, aerospace engineer, male version, and then apparently I really had to hit hard my keyboard. So the United States are on a completely different level. So let's see what we are able to do. Then we've got Mark Avila, who's the current director of the Center of Applied Space Technology and Microgravity, ZARM, and which is not as harmless, as docile in German as it sounds. And we would like to hear about currently important research projects. And of course, if you speak about aerospace activities in Bremen, then you can't do without Marco Fuchs. He is the chairman of the board of aerospace company OHBSE. They started 40 years ago at a very small space. It's the third largest aerospace corporation in Europe, and thus you have really a few things getting and going, and I won't ask you as a member of the supervisory board of the football club Werder Bremen, because there the situation is not as good. So, ignition and liftoff. I think I'm really a bit out of information, because when I looked into the topic that we're going to discuss today, I was really very astonished to see how many projects are already almost on the verge of being put into practice, and we will ask ourselves, where is the limit between vision and feasibility? And just to get a feeling as to how my guests are thinking, I would like to ask in detail, who of you would get into a rocket to fly to Mars? And please think carefully what you want to say, because we mean it seriously. So, Mr. Königsmann, a flight to Mars, would you be joining?
Well, yes, I would board the rocket, and I would like to go into low Earth orbit. But to Mars, I'd say I'll watch how it works. I'm someone who takes it piecemeal, and I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, I'll go to Mars now.
Okay, let's stay here. And Claudia Kessler, how about you?
Well, yes, I'll go along. I'll go to Mars, absolutely.
Without any concerns?
No buts, no strings attached.
Okay, that's an answer. Mr. Avila, how about you?
I certainly won't go. I think 2 years from now, you'll have to spend 2 years with 5 people on a very small space. My children are only little children. I wouldn't go.
And Marco Fuchs, how about you?
I'd like to go to space as well, but I'll join Hans. I'd go to low Earth orbit. I'd say the ISS is fine. You can look at the Earth. That's the beauty of space. Mars, then again, probably is something for the long haul, really, and we'll have to watch how it goes.
So I think you need a bit of time. I think 2.5 years, that is the time you need to plan to get there. And Thiel Eick, there's one of the 2 female astronauts, Ms. Kessler, that you have selected for the project of first German female astronaut in space, and she said she would do it, but she would not promise and could not promise to their children that she'd be coming back. And I think that this is really a bit worrying. Well, my daughter is an
grown-up daughter. And if you're enthusiastic, then Mars is the next frontier. Some people have been in low Earth orbit, some people have been to the moon even, but Mars is new, it's a new frontier.
Okay, one cannot stop you. I already noticed this. But what is the influence of the landing on the moon in 1969? How did it impact your career? Mr. Avila, you're too small, and to be honest, you weren't even born at the time. So that could have been very impressive. How about you, Mr. Königsmann? The 20th or 21st of July, depending on how you see it, in 69?
I was 6 years old at the time, and I can barely remember it, but the crucial factor was that a bit later on I had the impression, oh, I'm too late, it's done and dusted. And now I can say, no, it's not too late. It's not a singular event. We can build on it, you can do it differently, you can move further on, deeper into space, into Mars. And so that has influenced my approach.
And Claudia Kessler, I think there's even a picture of you being a small girl looking in a fascinated way to the TV.
It was a huge influence on me. That's why I'm here tonight. I personally can't remember. I was 4 years old. My mother told me, though, that I was transfixed by the TV broadcast. And I said, I want to go there. And, Ma'am, don't worry. If you see me on the moon, everything will be fine.
Marco Fuchs, you had a father who was also aerospace engineer, who also developed OHB. And did he wake you up? Did he call you at night?
You say it. Yes, that was a big thing at home. My father was an engineer with Erno, which was the name of the company at the time. They were all anticipating this. I'm not sure whether it was the first landing on the moon, but we did watch landings together at home, and that was part of our life. And it was fascinating. It was the first live transmission. It was the idea of a live transmission That was something that wasn't an everyday occurrence like we have it today.
And in an interview you said that whenever you see a start, you watch a start, that you've got this feeling, this strong feeling of grandeur or greatness or dignity. This is a feeling that you had. This is where we need to get.
I've watched numerous launches, but it's always exciting. You go back to the rocket the night before and you see how big it is, like a cathedral. There's a tower standing there, and the next day there's the launch. By now you're far away, but with the Russians, for instance, you're quite close. So the launches back in the 90s that I could see there, you actually felt it in your gut. And today it's always thrilling, and I'm sure, Hans, with every launch you do it almost like airplane takeoffs. It's always thrilling, and it's a physical experience. That's why rockets are so much more exciting than many other things, including with space travel. It's the exciting thing to leave Earth.
Elon Musk was not willing to start with this race of billionaires, different from Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos. Why didn't he join the flight? Mr. Königsmann, you know your boss or ex-boss and have known him for such a long time.
I don't know if I can speak for him, but I can speculate, and I think that's not the final destination. Mars is the destination, so for him that's not that important. That's my interpretation, at least. And I have to say I admire him for it.
Yeah, I think you have to get your priorities right, but let's get away from private passions and ask why. Why do we need space travel? Mr. Avila.
We need space exploration for day-to-day life, otherwise we won't have sat-navs anymore. We can't monitor the status of the Earth, which is extremely important for monitoring of climate change, all the disasters developing. Then pragmatically, that's the pragmatic approach. And then, as Mr. Fuchs said, space exploration is a source of inspiration and enthusiasm that is really important for little children as well. And I think that the world is unthinkable without space exploration in day-to-day life, but it's also an inspiration.
Could you give us an example? Why is space exploration without this everyday life not feasible? I tried to, for example, repair my espresso machine this morning and it didn't work. So this is more important. So why space exploration? Why should that play a role in my life? Could you please tell us?
Well, I came to the studio with the tram and then on foot, and I was routed by Google Maps.
Well, I think so as well. So we do not really feel anymore these everyday space exploration. It's about communication, it's about observation, so we've got satellite images. It's also navigation, so GPS and Galileo tells us exactly where we are, and a lot of other services are linked to this, but also science. A lot of scientific findings have been made available through space exploration, and this is why this is really an everyday component of our life. And next to this, there's the fascination, but I think the everyday aerospace activities is something that we don't feel anymore.
Right.
Ms. Kessler?
On top of the topics that were just mentioned, all the applications that we have on Earth, medical research, for instance, a lot of research is done in space on the human body, for instance, what's its behavior in zero gravity, but also to draw conclusions for applications, medical applications. Osteoporosis, for instance, is an application. The bone and muscle mass decreases in space, so we know what will be the upshot, and we can also draw conclusions for nutrition to avoid osteoporosis.
Well, when you suddenly jerk Mars is so important. I think the Mars journey would increase to a multifold the risk of osteoporosis for astronauts. But Ms. Kessler, research and medicine, then the male topics have made far more progress because there are so few women in space. And I think this is also something that's important to you because there are so many medical topics that are important. And I think the physicians really are waiting for first women in space.
It certainly is a big issue. There are no data about the female body, and internationally too, about 10% of astronauts have been female. And if we go to Mars, spending more time there and actually wishing to procreate, we will need some women there, and then we will need to know a lot more about how it works in space.
Okay, without space, we cannot solve the problems on Earth. This is what Marco Fuchs once said, and we've already heard a few examples, but if we now continue to think along that line, so there's the topic of climate, which is really very important to us, and there again, space activities are very important, like sun sails are important, then CO2 monitoring, and OHB is also participating in this in a project. Then there's the Earth observation. GEOMAR, the scientific Helmholtz Institute, is warning against risks and side effects and says, oh, all this research is also with a view of some risks, and one would have to think this through. What about you?
Well, I agree. We have to make a distinction, of course. Climate change, for instance, is something that we need to monitor. We need to give proof. That has been ongoing for many, many years. So we're in another phase by now. We know quite clearly by now how climate change happens. Science has progressed a lot here. So we're no longer in the phase of having to give proof whether or not there is an anthropogenic climate change. There is one. And it is probably faster and more dangerous than we sometimes try to convince ourselves. So it's a matter of course, I think, that we need to monitor the Earth out of space, and we have to move on into a new phase where we can also need to respond to the things that cause climate change. We can't just keep monitoring it and appeal to people and say, oh, we should get our act together. We are moving into a phase where sanctions are actually imposed and action is deduced, and I think that's undebatable. What still is in question is, where I'm not sure whether we understand things well, is to take active influence, because sometimes I think that is something I'm not so convinced to do. So the idea is to intercept the solar radiation, because that's what actually increases temperatures in the atmosphere, so we have to understand the solar irradiation and whether we can actually use solar panels, solar sails. That's, I don't know whether it's practicable, but there are other things, so-called geoengineering, i.e. things that you can do down on Earth in order to reduce the effect of solar radiation on the Earth. There are simple things that you can do. For instance, we might have vegetation. There are simple things. We can capture methane, and we have to make sure that the methane trapped in certain soils be retained there, so we can actually reforest certain areas. That's very simple geoengineering. The solar sails, that is something we can think about in theory. We could run models on it, but once we're there, then things haven't gone well.
Okay, just to get an idea, a sun sail should be 30 times larger than Germany, just to get an idea of the dimensions. But this is an idea that is pursued. And Mr. Avila, I've always got in my mind that this is really a complete offer to destroy the world. Like Plan B, we can't change anything here on Earth, so let's build our new Earth, our new civilization.
Well, personally, I think there is no plan B other than protecting our planet Earth. Of course, we want to go to Mars, but it's up to us, to people, to governments, to prevent the Earth from becoming uninhabitable for us. On the other hand, we can say that Mars today is simply a large desert, very dry, very arid. There's only sand, stones, an atmosphere that's really thin and composed exclusively of CO2, of carbon dioxide. So, billions of years ago, Mars used to have a lot of water, probably with rivers, etc. Today it's with oceans as well, but now it's only a desert. And in order to understand how this can happen, well, this will be possible for us if we go to Mars. Also, if we go to Mars and we have only stones, sand, carbon dioxide as a resource, then we need to turn CO2 into a resource, into something valuable that we can use to produce oxygen that we can breathe. Otherwise, we can't live there. So we need low energy processes because there's very little energy available on Mars. And I think that anything we can learn on Mars to survive there and even live there eventually will certainly be very beneficial for us here on Earth in order to develop environmentally friendly technologies to save water, to reduce CO2 emissions. So there's no plan B, but traveling to Mars, living on Mars will help us a lot to develop the Earth and to understand climate developments.
Okay, and we will research Mars in more detail, and you're also participating in this in the MRD20 project. But Mr. Königsmann, what is driving Elon Musk? Does he want to save the world?
Well, in a way, yes. For me, there are two motivations for going to Mars. Maybe we can see whether there has ever been life on Mars. We might find traces of life that went extinct, but it's really a natural science museum, because if I look at a dinosaur, and if I imagine that if the dinosaurs had had a chance to go to Mars, then there might be dinosaurs around today. But as they did not have any space exploration, no space travel, they went extinct. That's a bit over the top, maybe. Don't take it too literally, but that is something that I think of. It's not a plan B, really. It's certainly not the reason for us to do this. It's simply exploration, whether it could be a plan B. Would it be an option for us if there is something that happens to Earth 10 or 100,000 years from now?
Okay, this is a perspective. Dinosaurs on Mars, a completely new image in my head. And Elon Musk, and you actually as well, you said in 1 million years life will no longer be possible on Earth. Stephen Hawking said in 700 years, and Musk said, well, colonization of the Mars should be possible and humankind should be turned into a multi-planetary species. And there are a few ethical questions. Who will determine what is going to happen on Mars? Who will tell us how we are going to position ourselves? What are the important things that we need to regulate? There's so many different questions. So I would say smartphones stay here, and the internet and Facebook and co. And MRD20 is a project which currently tries to solve important questions, Mark Avila, also in context with questions such as how do people behave when they are in a habitat which is very similar to Mars, and the whole project is happening in the Negev Desert in Israel. It's just been completed. And ZARM, how did it participate? Because they were also involved in this project. So what was your part? How did you do research?
Well, there were two projects by Bremen University that ran there. One was chaired by Vela Hamedin from the economics department, economical psychology, to see how do people respond to unforeseen situations when they have to live and cooperate so closely together, because it's a question of life and death. We all know about this radio transmission. Houston, we have a problem, and it takes between 4 to 20 minutes before before Houston receives the message. And people on Mars will have to find solutions, maybe with the help of artificial intelligence and certain computer programs, but they have to find solutions, and even under pressure, under tension, they need to get control of the situation. Otherwise, they're doomed to die. That's an aspect that was looked into, and another aspect in another project. Ms. Heinecke had leadership there. They looked into how to design an airlock that allows astronauts to leave the habitat. So it's the interface between the habitat and the outside atmosphere. And when people go out onto Mars, we don't want to transmit bacteria or other microbiological organisms to Mars. If there is life there, then we could contaminate it. So everything that we do in the habitat and outside of the habitat needs to be decontaminated. That is complicated, and that was looked into.
Okay, this is something like base research, and for lay people, I've got the feeling that this is really very advanced. Ms. Kessler, do women do research differently when we are talking about these topics? Well, yes, I think that women sometimes have a different approach or research different topics. I think it hasn't been researched yet whether women do research differently from men, especially in space exploration, where there are very few women. And for a long period of time, I had the idea of having a satellite being built with 3 groups, 1 pure women, 1 pure men, and 1 mixed group, same task, and then to see how they approach this, and then to look what is different, what is same, and how different or similar the results are in the end. This is what I'd be interested in. But at the end of the day, I think you cannot really answer this question.
In Amity 20, I think it was 5 men, 1 woman who participated. Actually, now, what's the interests that women show in this fundamental research, actually? The spectacular thing is that space exploration, actually the traveling into space, there are many applicants, always both male and female, and at ESA a lot of people are filtered out. Maybe there aren't the qualified women among them. What's the interest? When you studied at the Technical University of Munich, I think you were the only woman who trained to be a space engineer. Has that changed?
Well, a lot has changed, and it's been almost 30 years ago. So now we are at 15 to 20% women studying engineering, and then there are geoscience or biologic research, and all this has an impact into space journey and also Earth observation. There's also a very high share of women. We reach almost 50%, and then it is much clearer that you're doing something for Earth, and it might not be as technical as machine engineering, which is the most technical topic where I think the women's share is still the lowest. But our goal with the female astronaut is exactly heading into that direction. That is with the first German female astronaut in space. This is to create a role model, an ideal for young girls. You can't become anything, also a female astronaut, because as long as we haven't got it, then there's this barrier. Shall I dare this? Because so far only men have done it.
Surprising that the only woman in this group is the only person who actually wants to travel to Mars. Now, we've spoken about the usefulness of space exploration, but how could it be detrimental if we think of ecological aspects? But there's a lot of research being done to develop drive alternatives as paraffin, I think, Mr. Avila. Is that possible? Is that envisionable that we could have zero-emission rockets launched into space?
Well, not in the foreseeable future. I cannot see that, because we need a lot of thrust. That is to get to the orbit and beyond. But one is researching in Germany. There are different companies, different propulsions, and paraffin are also which is used for candle wax. And these different propulsion topics need to be researched further, but if you ask me, well, I don't really see the problem with the rocket starts, because we don't that many. When you travel, for example, in the street with a car or also with aeroplanes, then the air pollution is much higher. That is their share than the share of rockets. But I would say the space debris is far more of a problem. That is all the satellites on the orbit around Earth, and they're becoming more and more, and also the concept, well, one flew to the moon, and everything that was used stayed on the moon, it is still there.
So separation of rubbish is still an issue, isn't it?
Yes, exactly, and in future this is something that we will have to include from the very beginning. That is why space travel has to be designed in such a way that we pollute as little as possible.
Well, that takes us to a very up-to-date case, because the Russians just shot down a satellite near the ISS. It's turned into shrapnel, threatening the ISS. That is an area where you can nearly talk about the next level. Star Wars, is that an issue? Hans Königsmann, you heard about this. What did you think when you heard about this?
Well, let's put it this way. This is annoying because on the one hand, we try to get all the upper stages down and to then discard of them on Earth. And we design satellites in such a way that no parts can fall off and that they re-enter and then they just burn. And then something like this happens, 10,000 or 100,000 parts were generated, and all these debris, well, there are more parts of the satellite than all of these together. And then you see how crazy this is. And I must say that I only saw this as a political threat.
Any other opinions from this group?
Well, it was a nasty surprise. A couple of years ago, we had a similar situation with the Chinese satellite that the Chinese really hit. And there was a large outcry at the time because we used the orbit altogether. And all these many, many thousand parts, which at an enormous speed travel, they have an enormous impact if they hit something. And this is why these areas cannot really be used by something else. And this is particularly bitter if it's close to the International Space Station, because there are people, but it's also the only space station there is, so they can't just move somewhere else. And that the Russians, as somebody who participates in ISS, that is somebody who is one of the more experienced players in space exploration, that they do us as a threat or just to show this is also something that we can do. Well, this is a way of aggression which is really concerning. And I was shocked by this cyber rattling because we said, well, more and more players, we thought, have understood the message that debris should be reduced at the source, so preventing its occurrence. And anybody who builds satellites has to prove that this does not turn into space waste, but that it is burning when it re-enters, or that it would be pushed into a graveyard orbit, so an orbit where it's not disturbing anybody. And that the Russians just do this to just show off and say, this is what we can do, and just also hinting at, we could also hit your satellites, because that's the message which is underlying. So this is really concerning, and this means that underneath the surface, there's apparently a Cold War taking place also in cyberspace, because otherwise this aggression wouldn't have been chosen, because this has been done on purpose.
Well, I've read headers such as militarization of orbits, that France has offensive weapons for espionage, defense, then laser weapons, space police has been talked about, all these kinds of things. And those are the things that people who don't look into this on a day-to-day basis have their the hair on the back raised, on the back of the neck, because we can't really understand what this is all about. How do you feel about this? And maybe a secondary question, what can we down on Earth here be told, or how can tempers be calmed down if people are worried?
Well, the worries mainly have to do with the infrastructure in space. This is the threat. That is to say, I can switch off your satellites. That is, your communication, your navigation, your Earth observation can be switched off. And for people on Earth, this is not really that threatening, because this is only indirectly that one is affected, because the usability cannot be used. So if somebody switches off GPS and Galileo, there's no navigation. And if you switch off communication satellites, then this type of communication is no longer possible. So this goes back to what we said initially. The importance and the everyday use of satellites is really prevented. It's like James Bond, in James Bond films. There's somebody who centrally says, I can really get this whole place mixed up. This is unpleasant to watch, but apparently there's some countries on Earth who could do this, and I'm certain that the Russians wanted to show that they are part of these countries. Well, I also believe that this is so. So we have to live with this risk. The risk is there, and it's not just Russia, but there are also other countries which sometimes threaten us through terrorists. And for the time being, it's only been life-threatening for the astronauts on ISS, but the threat is imminent. And it's always like this. Once a technology has been developed, it can always be used for the best or worst purposes. This has been the case for all technologies that humankind has developed so far. And then this is also true for space exploration.
So the genie's out of the bottle and we can't put it back in. But Mr. Fuchs, your company, I know, is working already on a space debris hoover. Great thing.
Well, many space companies do this, and especially space agencies, which feel responsible to reduce this space debris and to minimize it. It's not easy, and obviously you cannot collect this waste completely, but you have to see how in individual cases you can do such a cleanup exercise. It's very cumbersome, and there might be the risk that there are larger debris parts or satellites that can no longer be steered and controlled. And many space companies are pondering and asking themselves what can be done in such a case. And this will become more and more relevant. If you look at larger constellations, then as an operator, you have to prove that in case something breaks, I can really take care of it. And this is something that you need to prove at some point in time. And this is why I think it's a good idea that space agency and space industry try to anticipate these things as to how this could be done.
Right, Hans Königsmann, the Space Tech Expo Europe is right now happening in Bremen, a big meeting of the industry. You'd probably like to be here and have a little bit of a sausage here on a Christmas market.
Indeed, I would have loved to see and watch what's been happening, to meet the people and to look at what has happened technology-wise in Germany and in Europe.
I can tell you people like to wear glitter now. Have you been there, Mr. Avila, at the trade show? Did you have the time to check it out, to walk over? To see what are the trends in space exploration? What's the 2022 collection?
To be honest, I'll be only going there tomorrow in the morning, and I'll be happy to be there. And during the week, I've already met quite a number of colleagues, and you've seen what has happened during the pandemic, and not just meeting people through video, but on place, I'll be there tomorrow morning.
Marco Fuchs, Ms. Kessler, have you been there already, and what new discoveries have you made?
Well, I've been there yesterday and today, and as Mr. Avila said, first of all, it's this really joy to meet colleagues, friends, ex-colleagues again, because we are a worldwide community, and you know each other, and you meet again and again, and then one is really happy to meet everybody again, and the newest trends are just what we're talking about. It's the moon and the Mars, the return to moon with the steering module, the Orion, Airbus Orion, and then the next step to Mars, and then also space debris, the topic that we've just discussed, and then also climate and Earth observation. These are the core topics.
Okay.
I was there yesterday and today, so I directly came from the fair. And just the last talk before I started to get to this event here was with a former employee of your side, Katriona Chambers, Hans, and she said to say hello. I said that I'm on a panel with you, and she's here in Bremen. And so one is really watching this from throughout the world. There are many guests. It's the fourth time that this event took place. It's been a huge success. The first time there were 50 parties exhibiting, now 400, and it really became much larger. And it has really shown that it's bridging the gap between the larger air shows, and it's an industrial fair. And Bremen is happy to have it, and I think that this will continue to stay. And this is an industry which is actually happening here in Bremen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that is obviously an important commitment to this location, and Christina Vogt says that Bremen is the navel of the world and has the key to the moon. Let's see if that is true. Mr. Avila, which has been your latest important experiment on the drop tower? Maybe we have to explain that to the people who don't know it, who don't know Bremen. It's a tower 146 meters high. Looks a bit like a rocket when you look at it from a distance. You can see that from a distance. It's almost like a landmark. It helps you with your orientation if you want to go to the university in Bremen. And you experiment in a lot of different areas. Now, which was the last biggest project or experiment that took us a step further?
Well, it's nice to hear from you that the drop tower looks like a rocket. And there had been ideas of cladding it, and this has not been done. But what do we do? Well, we let our experiments drop in vacuum or zero gravity, and this is like being in space. And there are experiments in many different areas, and one that really makes me enthusiastic right now to show on a small scale how a rocket could be fueled in space. So if we wanted to go to Mars, for example, then we cannot really put all the fuel here on space, but it has to be fueled in orbit, and it's not that easy, and we've been working on it, and the experiments now start to show a success to develop it further.
Hans Königsmann knows the drop tower. Before you left for the US, you did a lot of research there yourself. Marco Fuchs, do you check out what's happening there? Do you exchange ideas? Do you go through the university, the various institutes? Do you check for possible recruits? How much interchange is there between your company and the university? Well, at the ZARM, the Drop Tower has seen close cooperation, very intensive cooperation for decades. We've been on board since the very beginning, and the first satellite that was tested there was a satellite by ZARM. I think that was 30 years ago, and now, over the last years and decades, the Institute for Environmental Physics is very important. It's about Earth monitoring, climate, and it's about developing the sensors that help us detect the crucial aspects. So we cooperate with the university because we're a child of this environment, and we want to have a benefit in recruiting good staff, of course. That's why you move into that kind of cluster.
Yes, thank you. Half-time for our event, and I think now it's time for a little show, and we asked ABBA to join us with a bit of musical entertainment, and we've already chosen the right costume, but they couldn't come in the end. So, question to the round, Mr. Königsmann, which music would you take along? Maybe not to Mars, maybe to the ISS flight.
Oh, good question. I might have been better
Just
prepared.
Spontaneously.
Jay-Z, spontaneously.
Miss Kessler?
Rocketman von Elton John.
Rocketman by Elton John.
Mr. Avila?
Antonio Fonte from Majorca.
Okay, the gentleman comes from Barcelona, something we haven't mentioned yet. And Marco Fuchs, may I guess?
Shoot away.
Heavy Metal oder Werder-Hymne?
Heavy metal or the Werder song?
I'd say I'd take ABBA along, actually. The new ABBA music has really touched me.
Well, I thought you were a fan of the Wacken
Well,
Festival.
you're a visitor of Wacken, not a fan.
Well, yes, of course. When you go to the festival, this is what you get. You get a certain equipment, a T-shirt for Wacken, and this is what you need to take along.
Matthias Maurer listened to Rammstein and Die Toten Hosen, a German band, on his way to the launch pad in his Tesla. Now, what did you think, Ms. Kessler?
Well, this is exactly what I thought, and I must say I didn't watch it because it really touched me differently.
You've been really
that again,
annoyed by that.
a different German man got into space.
How come that none of the two women was launched into space?
Well, we started as a private initiative, and we are not a national space agency. That is with our initiative of getting the first German woman into space. We don't have the public support, we don't have the budget, and with regard to the selection and the training of women, this is all privately financed, and for the reasons mentioned, we think it's important. That is the role model also, but also for medical research, and we think it's high time to do this. But so far, we didn't get any financial or political support for this topic, and this is why we couldn't afford the start to space. And in 2018, we were with Hans to SpaceX, and we set trial with the female astronauts at the capsule, and with Axiom, again, a commercial space travel company. They said as soon as we've got the finances, we've got a space or a seat to go to space, but this is the problem.
I still can't understand why it's such a big issue. Do you? Well, it is very political. In Germany, we say astronauts is an issue for the European Space Agency. We won't get involved. In 2016, ESA told me that there are no qualified women in Germany. That's why we can't launch any. And there is a new selection by the agency for new female astronauts, but if a German astronaut is selected, a female selected, she will be launched no sooner than 2028. I think it's time now. We need the workforce, the enthusiasm among young people. We need women in technical fields, and we should show that it is possible to do it. This is 2021, after all. In the US and other countries, they can't see why women hadn't been launched to space yet.
US American female astronauts, 60, I think, Mr. Königsmann. What about SpaceX, Elon Musk's company? What is the women's share? How many women work for the company?
I'd estimate somewhere between 20 and 30%, depending on what field of application we talk. In some areas, we have 50% or more. For me, it's always a difficult issue because there are too few women coming from the university, so we have to start earlier to get women to go into those fields. For me, it was a good sign that we had a president of SpaceX for 10 years, a female president, and for many years as a VP previously, and she's a good friend of mine. So I'm always happy when women are successful, but that's one of the problems that we need to address in order to get women launched into space.
Okay, and here we can just wave to Berlin, because there is Ms. Reker, Marco Fuchs, and I think your share at the company, women's share, is 18-20%. Mr. Avila, how about you at the institute? That is at the ZARM?
About the same. And we're really working hard to enthuse women for space. The problem is really that too few women choose to take up engineering studies, and we're going into the high schools and trying to increase girls' motivation. But as Ms. Kessler said, we lack the role models. We live in a country where many women don't work outside of the home. We have a tax regime that favors women staying at home, looking after the children. So there are role models, good female teachers in technical fields. So it'll take a long, long time. I think the universities are little bit too late to change things here now. There are too few women who take up technical studies. It has a societal background, of course. That's similar as in other countries. And we think about it a lot. We feel a bit helpless because we don't know where to get started, because we have to start very early on, I think.
I think you were 34 when you became director of the ZARM in 2016, and then you went quickly into parental leave, if I'm
That's correct, yes. I took parental leave twice, first 100%, and then when I took on the presidency of ZARM, I still did 25% of my time putting it into work, because I couldn't absent myself entirely, but it was important to me. We try to split up things at home 50-50, and when children fall ill, then we look after them. They're our children, after all. And I think it's necessary to see, for the children to see that there are no distinctions between the parents, that household chores are taken on jointly, and that for both it's important to progress in their fields of work. And I think that it's very important that the children and the babies, maybe for obvious reasons, they need to spend a bit more time with their mothers. But in day-to-day life, I think it's necessary to split it reasonably.
And Mr. Fuchs wanted to say something. Well, now at OHB we've got 2 women in the executive board, also in the supervisory board we've got 2 women. But still, this is not a good balance. It is still difficult, but things are changing, and I see this change and notice it, and there are more women in management positions, and I think that this is a qualitative change, which is clearly there. Quantity-wise, I'd say, well, for the reasons just mentioned, I'd say that this is not that visible, but I think that this is not specific for the space industry. I think that for ours, it's even higher than in other technical fields, as Claudia said. These are really committed women from the scientific field, and in some disciplines like Earth monitoring, there the women's share is very high.
Apropos, you're a Venus fan, Marco Fuchs. And you say that Venus should be the object of interest. Yes, Mars will take their long, we can all do it, but Venus is interesting, particularly against the background of climate change. What can we learn from Venus?
Well, there aren't that many targets. If you think about space travel, and this is not true. You could think there are many, but there's just Moon, Mars, and Venus, and maybe then there's Jupiter and Saturn, but that's it. So the sphere is much smaller than one would have thought, and as Star Trek makes us believe. And this is why Venus is the next. So you've got Mars, and then there's Venus, so a close neighbor, and this is why it's so obvious. And of course, you cannot really land that nicely because it's got a heat of 400 degrees Celsius, and you cannot really build a station. Nor can you maintain life with human beings or life in general. But there are assumptions that there might be a very simple form of biology. So at the border between chemistry and biology, there might be something, not on the soil, but at specific atmospheric spheres at a height of 50 to 60 kilometers. And this is why it's very clear that this must be interesting. And in the 70s and 80s, the Soviets did a lot of research and had a successful landing. But with the Venus, the problem is that the pictures are not that nice and beautiful because it's a dense atmosphere. So the appeal is not as high as for Mars. But that we have to have a closer look at this is also true for the aspect that you mentioned. Venus is really a deterring example. That is once a planet, and these are the two neighboring planets. If Mars and Venus, if they present a desert and a heat soup, then you have to really ask yourself, how robust is our atmosphere? And this is the experience. So when you look down to the Earth from ISS, then you see how thin the atmosphere is. And the astronaut I spoke to said the most impressive, all of them said, is the Earth with this very, very thin cover. And then with Venus, you can really understand what can happen if. And this is something that needs more research. We need to understand more and then hopefully do prevention on Earth.
Yes, well, if the boss of such a company says, I find Venus interesting, fascinating, does that kickstart everything? Does that mean that all the departments kick into action developing things because they say, oh, an ESA Venus mission would be desirable? To what extent is that still in the stars?
Well, the space region, they're all academics, everybody's studied, they all know better, everybody's got his or her own opinion. You need to convince people. You cannot just say Venus is better, then they say, oh yeah, he studied this, and that doesn't help. There are no Venus programs yet. Of course, I know this, and I don't do this as a business development, saying we have to go there. I just say there are very few interesting goals or targets or destinations, and this is one, and certainly there will be missions that will be going there. But interestingly enough, there are even some private initiatives flying to Venus. So there has always been an interest in Venus. It's never been that high in Europe as one would have thought, where we always think everything has to be immediately usable, and Venus is not that easy to use. But this is why I'm happy that Venus is there. It's a very interesting planet, and be happy if Europe or maybe even Germany would also have a closer look at it.
Well, you just mentioned it. Commercial space travel takes up a lot of space right now. It used to be an exclusively state matter. Numerous companies are doing research, are launching space rockets, and I think in 2018 you joined Jeff Bezos to cooperate in space exploration.
Yes, as a space company, we are interested in supplying private interested parties, and of course, USA, Blue Origin, they build rockets or will start rockets, and we deliver parts from our Augsburg outlet facility, and we are also working for Boeing and SLS and also to India. We are happy to supply, and we also have developed topics with Jeff Bezos and his moon plans, because he's got the idea of going to the moon, and he needs a large lander, and there are also things where we participate.
Hans Königsmann, you didn't go to the US because of Elon Musk, as far as I know. There was another employer in between, but you met him. And there was mutual fascination. He recruited you, and then the interview was held in your living room, right?
That's correct.
How did he recruit you?
Well, it wasn't really difficult. If somebody comes and says, I want to build a rocket, and would like to develop this, and I've got the investments that are required, at least investment, that provided a situation which is not often given, and this is why I was immediately interested. And Ian also knew how to build up a company and how to design it in such a way that it will be successful. This was another lucky incident. And at the very beginning, we didn't have any offices. We met at hotels, at meeting rooms, and this is why we had to have the interview at my home.
So, what do you think? What benefits did you have for having worked there for many years compared to what you could have done in Germany in the space business?
Well, there's money going into commercial space travel, and there are entrepreneurs who've got visions, plus the money which is behind those visions. And Ian is one of them. And Ian has put his whole private finances into SpaceX and Tesla, and worked on making these two companies successful. And the fruit of this is what we see today, so that rockets are reusable, that the start costs have come down, and we've got commercial astronauts who stay or can use space for a couple of days. And all these are performances that I would never have thought to become possible. And the entrepreneur and the capital behind it and the investment is what made it.
Right. NASA and ESA are also cooperate with SpaceX. Why do they do that?
NASA needs starts, and we offer starts and rockets, and they're more cost-favorable because they're reusable. And a couple of years ago, we worked together with NASA on a commercial initiative. That is a shuttle replacement, that's Dragon. That is what you see at the top on the rocket. Oh, where is it? Over there, yeah? And this concept is different from NASA usually does. That is, NASA is giving us an order to develop something, and they expect SpaceX to invest as well. And I must say the partnership of NASA and SpaceX was extremely successful. And over the years, it allowed us to develop at SpaceX, and we had an influence on NASA. And again, this was one of the most successful decisions of NASA.
Reusability is a big issue, I think. There's a lot of money at stake here, and Ariane, it is said, is a bit of an outdated approach. Reusability is crucial, and a lot of startups are working on this, as far as I know. So there are numerous smaller companies behind now that do research here. Do you all have an overview of who does what, who's doing what? Is that well connected in Germany, in Europe? Do all the companies know about all the other companies? Do they cooperate, or is everybody trying to do their own thing and try to build have the biggest launch, like a bit the struggle of the billionaires in the US? Well, I think in Europe and in Germany, it's still a relatively small industry. There are many startups, but they know each other. And we have to say Ariane is working on the reusability of future rockets. That's an important issue. There are approaches, concepts for this that are being developed at the German Space Aerospace Center with a different approach. They basically will fly in a loop. Then there are many ideas in different companies, but more in the US, obviously.
Ms. Kessler, when you hear all this, you are very busy with your promotion of female astronauts. Is that really itching you a bit? That is, as a space engineer, to participate in the technical development of new projects?
Well, every day has only a certain number of hours, and you have to focus on your own thing. But with Astronaut in GmbH, we basically launch our own startup company. So we're a startup company in space exploration now, where we make the astronaut training available not only to astronauts, but also to the wider business community as management training courses, and we're well connected here. In Germany, it is a small community only, so you don't lose sight of all the different companies and startups that are emerging, and they're luckily beginning to develop now.
Well, there's a sort of gold digger atmosphere, gold digging, so this is where the future is in the years to come, and apparently one thinks that a lot of money can be earned, and this is why commercial air travel is starting, and Mr. Königsmann is nodding.
Yes, gold diggers' mood is the right way of putting it, because a lot of people who start this now won't reach the finish line. It's a technical, difficult, and challenging thing. Every company doesn't have the technical know-how, the financial backing that is necessary. So that's a worry I have, that a lot of companies will throw in the towel. It doesn't have to happen, but it might happen. And then I have to say that the scene here is quite obvious. There are numerous companies that are invested here. A lot of companies that become basically spin-offs of SpaceX, a lot of people leaving SpaceX, starting their own companies. So it's an interesting time to be here and to see how many people are enthusiastic and how much this is a renaissance of space exploration, really.
Well, for you at Augsburg, it's Rocket Factory, a young international group which is developing the micro-launcher. This is Ryanair for satellites, if I got it correctly?
Right, yes. Like Hans said, it's very difficult to keep an eye on everything. There are so many different companies. There are different rocket projects, more than 100 worldwide, and of course only a few of those will be successful. For many years and decades, we've been involved with Ariane. We are the biggest supplier for the Ariane rocket. We've seen the successful years, but we have to say, and Hans said it, SpaceX really changed the world because they have an excellent rocket. So space exploration has a lot to do with the quality, or success has a lot to do with the quality of the product, and it's reusable. If you see this rocket, a huge unit, it's a matter of course that it shouldn't fly only for a few minutes. It's only a few minutes that they're in use, really. The capsules, they fly for a few days. But that all of this should be thrown out or just dissipates. That's not acceptable. That's why this company, SpaceX, is so successful. And of course, this opens up the floodgates, inspiring people. And that's what's so interesting. That's what I believe is the most important thing of space exploration. We have to go there. At the end of the day, we need to leave Earth. So the rockets are top in this industry, I think.
Well, I think it's still quite comfortable down here, but measuring the powers of the three together with Branson, and is that really moving onward? And Ms. Kessler, you are really watching this with a worried eye, all those matches really measuring the muscular forces. Well, I'd be happy if there were a woman among them, but in principle this is very positive for aerospace as well as our space industry as well as for humankind, because it enlarges the market and also the possibilities. And the concepts are very different of these three men. It's not the same, because Virgin, it's Richard Branson, then it's suborbital with Jeff Bezos, and then I think this is a completely different class with Elon Musk, that is to ISS and then to the moon, and maybe then even reaching Mars. So these are three very different concepts, and you cannot really put them all together. And as Marco said, it's really always the intention of getting away from this nice, comfortable planet.
All right. Wolfgang Hillebrand, the astrophysicist, says ISS is a huge sink for money. Robots have to get involved, robotics. Why send people out there? And Jan Werner, I think, says, Secretary General of ESA up until recently, says that the concept of manned space travel is over.
Especially manned. Now it's astronautical. Travel.
Well, the space station was designed and built for human space exploration. To make it all robotic wouldn't make sense. It's about research for Earth, materials research, etc. And there are a lot of things that could be done in an automated way with robotics. But it's also about evolution for humanity. It's the first astronauts that went into space and to the moon, who had this outside view of our planet, that we're not down on Earth here and somewhere out there is space. No, we're in the midst of it, and now we can feel it.
Now I can feel it as well.
Yes, it's all around us, and that's this knowledge and this change of awareness.
But in that point, wouldn't it be important really to spread this in the general public and not just have these specialist talks and fairs? So how would one get this very important topic to the people, to these difficult times that we experience? That is where one would have to sort out so many things on Earth.
Well, as a startup with Astronautin GmbH are well involved here. Our slogan is Space for You, so we go out there. Since I started with my initiative, not a week has passed where I didn't speak publicly in an interview, in a meeting, about this very issue, to get this across, that space is part of the Earth, or the other way around, that they are inextricably intertwined, and that we can't separate this, that we have to solve our problems down here before we go to space. We can't do that. It's way too complex to understand it from down here.
However, philosophers are also brought on board in order to have a perspective onto these matters, and you all nod, so you've got your own experience. And what are the questions that need to be answered from that perspective?
Well, at the University of Bremen, we cooperate with colleagues from philosophy and sociology. We've been doing that for a short time only, I have to say, but what happens if people live on Mars or on Moon for a long period of time? Then that would change. If they settle there, then it would change our view of ourselves as people, what it means to be human. It would also have important repercussions on society, as you mentioned earlier, if it's done individually by the user or in cooperation. So there are many socio-political questions involved here that would have an impact on Earth, but we're beginning to do research in this field with our colleagues. But to get back to the point, why do we need people in space exploration? There are many examples from the ISS that are relevant here. For instance, important for small babies, but also firefighting equipment that was developed for the ISS. And if we want to send people to Mars, why do we want to do that? Some robots have been landed there already, and we've learned a lot with them. But to answer additional questions, robots can only do a small fraction of what people can do. Even to drill a hole on Mars is a big challenge for a robot. That's something a human person can do relatively easily. So in order to make scientific progress, as Hans said earlier, if we want to do that on Mars, we need people there.
Ms. Kessler, you wanted to add something. This important question. Yes, coming back to philosophy, well, at the end of the day, the question is, where do we come from, where do we go? And this is something that you cannot really separate from space. So it's astrophysics, where you go into deep research. That is what is happening to the universe. And just recently, I had a radio discussion also with children, where the question was, how can it be that the universe is endless, but expands at the same time? And these are questions that are coming up. And this is something where the transition to philosophy is really very fluid.
Yes, but aren't those pragmatic questions really, if you think about settling a new planet, what will that mean for civilization? What will be the laws? Who's discussing this? Who will determine this?
This is a very good question. We have an outer space treaty, that is a treaty which dates back prior to the landing of the moon, and since then, with regard to the legal side, little has changed, and this is why I think now there's really the time to bring together colleagues from sociology and philosophy. What are the different scenarios we could see? Because colonization of Mars will only take place in 20 to 30 years of time, if you're very optimistic and think it's early. And then we've got now time to ask all these questions and to develop ideas, and this then to make them available to society and to politicians. The times are very different from the time of the Cold War, where you could show, I can really put the flag first on Moon, but now there's a lot of cooperation taking place, and this is why I hope that the colonization of Mars will be a collaborative effort. But there are different scenarios and different ideas, and this is why we have to assess and look at them to empower decisions.
It's also about claims of property, 1,000 square meters of moon. You have some property there. Who looks after it when you're not there?
Don't really know. It's apparently quite calm and easygoing. But this is a discussion, actually, that is happening, that is taking place, even if it's not in public. And at the end of the day, it's again the question as to, well, facts are created, so we can assume if there's a return to Moon or Mars, then benefit will be founded by facts. And we in Europe are a bit trailing behind. That is in contrast to other players. We've been stronger in the past, but now we don't have any plans for people in space apart from ISS. Whereas in the US, there are big plans, in Asia, there are big plans, and we are satisfied with what we've done. And we can say from Germany, we were leading the European part of the ISS, and this is nice and it's always prolonged. But apart from that, looking at a specific vision about what we want to do from Germany or Europe, well, this doesn't exist. And we lost really this idea of acting, and others do it.
Hans Königsmann, to what extent do you follow what's happening in Europe, in Germany, in Bremen, in terms of space exploration?
Well, I always follow developments, and I must say that I really agree to Mr. Fuchs. The train has left the station, so we really need to act to get to the standard, a standard which has been set by the United States, in particular by SpaceX. And this means reusability, and completely reusability, not just the first stage, but also second stage. And reusability, not really reusing it after a year, after having taken it apart and put it together again, but reusable the next day. And all these are prerequisites to make progress in space exploration and really to get, or to put Mars and the Moon into a success.
Well, politicians, well, the new government, once it's installed, they might get a friendly nudge to maybe make decisions in this field. You probably have this expectation and hope. You probably all share it.
And if I may, I just wanted to say with regard to the astronauts, my opinion has changed significantly over the last 10 to 20 years, because, to some extent, because I worked with Elon Musk. And it's important to see that there are people on Earth who look like me, but they do things in space which are phenomenal. They're flying around, they do science, and this is why Claudia's argument is so important. That is, women need to participate in this. Women and girls on Earth have to see, oh, this could be me. And a decisive argument was for me prior to commercial missions. That is, commercial missions who suddenly showed me, oh, there are normal people going. I could do it as well. I would need a bit more money, but in the basic idea, these are people just like me who are going to space.
Well, if we had such a Derek Zuckerman in Germany, I think that was a highlight as well.
Well, so if I asked you in 10 years' time, Ms. Kessler, what are you looking back onto with pride? Then your answer would clearly be first German female astronaut, or maybe a few more. Last question to the round, and I think we are all a bit dizzy looking at all the information that we heard, what we thought about. And what is grounding you, Hans Königsmann?
My family, Yep, my family and friends.
Marco Fuchs.
Marco Fuchs?
Well, here in Bremen, live a normal life and nevertheless participating in these things. It's really fascinating if you see in such a discussion that it is something quite extraordinary for most people, and otherwise we live our normal lives of citizens of Bremen, in our families, with our friends, and in the companies as well. It's much less spectacular than you would imagine. You just go to your office in the morning, and whether you work on a satellite or a space rocket, that's no different from somewhere else.
We cannot check whether this is true. Ms. Kessler, what is grounding you?
Well, I'm grounded by the beauty of this planet, and I really love being in this planet and out in nature and in the forest, in the woods where it's green, where the birds are out in the garden. That is something that I'm quite aware of, how precious our planet is and how much we need to protect it and preserve it for generations to come.
And I think if you went to Mars, you would take the tomato seeds
Precisely.
and chicken. How about you, Mr. Avila?
Well, with me, it's definitely the family, to be with the family, with the children, but also the work at the university with my colleagues, the scientific discussion at the institute, but also with other professors. I think at the university we have a beautiful discussion culture where I notice every day I need to learn more every day, and I find that great. I'm enthusiastic about this, and that really grounds me.
Okay, so nobody got his or her head in the cloud, and I think I have to take away the dust from the stars. And I would like to thank all the participants of the discussion, Mr. Königsmann, Ms. Kessler, Mr. Fuchs, and Mr. Avila. Thanks to all of you. And I would also like to thank you at the event studio of Radio Bremen, but also at the Bremen representation in Berlin. And there they had something nice to drink, and this is also something that we would like to join in. So we will land for today, but we will also take off, and that's on the 14th of December. And then we are going to talk about climate change, politics, and research, climate university, or just saving climate. And enjoy the day, your evening, and see you next time. Thank you very much.
Sind Sie denn alle noch da?